Hi everybody, this is going to be the lecture video for A&P. This is an important story and I wanted to make sure that I recorded a video over my close reading of A&P because every essay that we do this semester, I'm going to refer back to A&P for advice for you on how to do it. So you will not be allowed to write an essay about A&P, but it's going to be our shared story. So because it's our shared story, it was really important to me that everyone read it closely and got the lecture from it. I went ahead and created a Google Doc of A&P so that I could highlight it, and I used the rainbow again and the seven elements of fiction that we are looking at as we're reading the stories, and I have them highlighted and I put the key on there. And as soon as I'm finished with this video, I will download the video and put it in there, but I will also put this version of the story in for you to go and see. Now, I am not asking you to highlight your stories in this way or to annotate your stories like this. The only thing that I am asking you to do is each time you write an essay about a story, you're going to do a full plot diagram, and these are the elements that go into a plot diagram. So I'm showing you how I would use them, and then later when you see my sample essays over A&P, you'll see where I pulled things from. So I'm just going to start at the beginning. This story is called A&P, and it was written in 1961. It was, I think, originally published in the New Yorker. So I have all of these comments over here, and I'm hoping that the comments show up when I share it with you, but I'm definitely going to have them in this video. So the first thing that I highlighted is this setting idea of A&P, and that is because an A&P store is a general purpose grocery store, but they are usually found in the Northeast and the Midwest of the United States. So it gives you an idea that this is definitely an American story, but it's an American story that takes place in the Northeast or Midwest, and we'll find out a little bit more about the setting later. Also, 1961 is important. 1961 is just at the very beginning of the Cold War, and of course the Cold War is the conflict between democracy with countries such as the United States and Great Britain and most of the European countries, the Western European countries, and communism, mainly Russia, but also China and Cuba. So this idea of the Cold War is definitely there, but we also have just had this kind of crazy 1950s, which teenagers began to have a huge role in society. We have poodle skirts and drag racing and all kinds of sock hops and activities where teenagers could drive, and it was sort of this, the whole world seemed to be an us versus them mentality in the United States, like where teenagers versus the adults, the youth wanting to try new things and be adventurous and go up against their parents and not turn into their parents. So that is the whole background of what happened in this story. You have to be real careful when you look at a story too. You don't want to assume that the author is the narrator. So John Updike is the author, but he's not necessarily the narrator. The narrator is a different individual. So I'm going to read paragraph by paragraph, and then I'm going to come and look at the notes I've taken and the highlighting I've done. So here we go. In walks these three girls in nothing but bathing suits. I'm in the third checkout slot with my back to the door, so I don't see them until they're over by the bread. The one that caught my eye first was the one in the plaid green two-piece. She was a chunky kid with a good tan and a sweet, broad, soft-looking can with those two crescents of white just under it where the sun never seems to hit at the top of the backs of her legs. I stood there with my hand on my box of Hi-Ho crackers, trying to remember if I rang it up or not. I ring it up again, and the customer starts giving me hell. She's one of these cash register watchers, a witch about 50 with rouge on her cheekbones and no eyebrows. And I know it made her day to trip me up. She'd been watching cash registers for 40 years and probably never seen a mistake before. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is tone. And there is a lot of tone that is highlighted in this, but there's a lot of tone that's not highlighted in this. So if you find a different tone phrase and you think that it would be better, you're probably absolutely right that you could use that too. But I just picked a few. So in walks these, I kind of highlighted this word walks to describe that it's colloquial language. Colloquial language is just a fancy way of saying slang, and it is specific to the time and the narrator. and it really sounds like a teenage boy in the late 50s, early 60s talking. And this idea of using this slang makes it more like he's talking the story rather than writing the story. And that act of talking creates a conversation between the reader and the narrator. So it's a connection. So that's the first thing. And then these orange, all of the orange highlighting is characters. And I've highlighted stuff about all of the characters in the story. When you are writing your piece about a story, you're only going to be looking into one character. When you're doing a plot diagram, you're going to try to do 2 or 3 characters. You don't have to do every character like I've done. So these 3 girls in nothing but bathing suits, and we talked a lot in class about the significance of the bathing suits because people don't wear bathing suits to the grocery store at this time, and it really shows the girls' arrogance and disregard for the rules. I have highlighted a bunch of things in this green, and I've added some highlights throughout the story for this too, to show the point of view, just reminding us this is first person. It keeps using I. I'm in the third checkout, right? Then the plaid green 2-piece. Soft looking can is another tone word because can, he's referring to her bottom. And we don't call it that anymore. That's a real 1950s term. Here, the Hi-Ho crackers, I highlighted this for setting. That's because Hi-Ho crackers are not available in the South. I've never seen them, but I do know what they are because my cousins from Ohio used to eat them. And they're basically Ritz crackers, the circular cracker, but the brand name is Hi-Ho. So there you go. And this, I rang it up, tells us that's a characterization of the narrator that he is a store clerk. And here's the note about the Hi-Ho crackers. And the narrator works at the A&P. By the time I got her feathers smoothed and her goodies in a bag, she gives me a little snort in passing. If she'd been born in the right time, they would have burned her over in Salem. By the time I get her on her way, the girls had circled around the bread and were coming back without a push cart, back my way along the counters in the aisle between the checkouts and the specials bin. They didn't even have shoes on. There was this chunky one with the 2-piece. It was bright green and the seams on the bra were still sharp and her belly was still pretty pale, so I guess she just got it, the suit. There was this one with those chubby berry faces, the lips all bunched together under her nose, this one, and the tall one with the black hair that hadn't quite frizzled right, and one of those sunburns right across the eyes and a chin that was too long. You know, the kind of girl other girls think is very striking, attractive, but never quite makes it, and they very well know, which is why they like her so much. And then the third one, which wasn't quite so tall. She was the queen. She kind of led them, with the other 2 peeking around and making their shoulders round. She didn't look around, not this queen. She just walked straight on slowly with those long, white, prima donna legs. She came down a little hard on the heels, as if she didn't walk in bare feet that much, putting down her heels and then letting the weight move along her toes as if she was testing the floor with every step, putting a little deliberate extra action into it. You never know for sure how girls' minds work. Do you really think it's a mind in there or just a little buzz like a bee in a glass jar? But she got the idea. She talked the other 2 into coming here with her, and now she was showing them how to do it. Walk slow and hold yourself straight. Okay, so when we look at this, this is a real long description of the girls. So I have some language elements here. This language element right here is basically a really, really long sentence with dashes, and it goes to the whole colloquial tone of the story and the talking of the narrator, because it sounds like he's telling us a story. The next thing, this burned her over in Salem, that's an allusion to the Salem witch trials. He's calling this customer a witch. Then basically talking about the shoes, and he describes her as the queen. This is orange for characterization, but it's also a metaphor, right? She's obviously not a queen. We don't have royalty in this country, but she presents herself like she's in charge. Prima donna legs. A prima donna is the lead dancer in a ballet. So this is an allusion, and the connotation, of course, is that not only is she the leader, but she's also beautiful and thin with these legs that go on forever. If you've ever seen the prima donna in a production of anything, they are the principal dancer, the and the focus is on them. So she's really used to being in the spotlight, this girl. This right here is a rhetorical question with that direct address to the reader, and it shows us that he's kind of breaking that wall between the reader and the writer. He's talking directly to the reader. He's like, can you believe this? But also he's asking a legitimate question. Like, how do girls' minds work? It shows us how naive Sammy is. He doesn't really understand women. She had on this kind of dirty pink, beige maybe, I don't know, bathing suit with a little nubble all over it. And what got me, the straps were down. Oh, I should have really highlighted this. This is very much that tone. There you go. They were off her shoulders, looped loose around the cool tops of her arms, and I guess as a result, the suit had slipped a little on her. So all around the top of the cloth, there was this shining rim. If it hadn't been there, you wouldn't have known there could be anything whiter than those shoulders with the straps pushed off. There was nothing between the top of the suit and the top of her head except just her. That clean, bare plane of the top of her chest, down from the shoulder bones like a dented sheet of metal tilted in the light. I mean, it was more than pretty. She had sort of oaky hair that the sun and salt had bleached, done up in a bun that was unraveling with a kind of prim face. Walking into the A&P with your straps down, I suppose that's the only kind of face you could have. She held her head so high, her long neck coming out of those white shoulders looked kind of stretched, but I didn't mind. The longer her neck was, the more of her there was. So this is more characterization of the queen, and I've only highlighted I've highlighted a word or two in each thing where I put a comment so it doesn't take away the color, so you can still see. So this is her characterization. She's holding her head up so high that her neck is really long, but by holding her neck up high, obviously it puts her chin up and she's looking down on everyone else. And this is basically just showing her as a high-class person. This is classism. She's upper class. She looks down on everyone else. She thinks she's better than everyone. So she must have felt in the corner of her eye, me and over my shoulder Stokesy in the second slot watching, but she didn't tip, not this queen. She kept her eyes moving across the racks and stopped and turned so slow it made my stomach rub the inside of my apron, and buzzed to the other two who kind of huddled against her for relief. And they, all three of them, went up the cat and dog and food and breakfast, the cereal, macaroni, rice, raisins, seasoning spreads, spaghetti, soft drinks, crackers, and cookies aisle. From the third slot, I looked straight up this aisle to the meat counter, and I watched them all the way. The fat one with the tan sort of fumbled with the cookies, but on second thought she put the package back. The sheep pushing their carts down the aisle, the girls were walking against the usual traffic. Not that we have one-way signs or anything. They were pretty hilarious. You could see them when Queenie's white shoulders dawned on them. Kind of jerk or hop or hiccup, but their eyes snapped back to their own baskets and on they pushed. I bet you could set off dynamite in an A&P and the people would, by and large, keep reaching and checking oatmeal off their list and muttering, let me see, there was a third thing, began with A. Asparagus? No, it's applesauce. Whatever it was, they do mutter. But there was no doubt this jiggled them. A few house slaves and pin curlers even looked around after pushing their carts past to make sure what they had seen was correct. Okay, so there's a lot going on in this paragraph. We meet Stokesy, who is a fellow worker at the A&P, and we have this, not this queen. This is a language device. It's a fragment. You know, I always tell you, you're not allowed to use fragments. Published writers are. He uses this fragment to emphasize how unconventional this queen was, that she doesn't care about the rules at all. Then there's this kind of weird phrase here that I sort of glossed over, but it made my stomach rub the inside of my apron. All I'm going to say about this is that this indicates how very, very pretty that he thinks these girls are. This cat and dog and food and cereal and macaroni and raisins, speed spread or whatever, this is a colloquial tone again. It's this language, and it's called enjambment, where you put the words all together with no spaces between to show that this is how the narrator thinks. We're in his head, and it's just that connection again with the narrator. Just a point of view here thing. I watched him all the way. Then he refers to the customers as sheep. This is a really interesting metaphor that he's using, because the sheep sheep are known for following. They follow when you ever see the sheepdogs running, they are easy to herd and easy to lead places. They just follow the leader. So the customers are sheep, which is this illusion or a metaphor or a symbol for the customers being conformists, following everything. And it creates a direct opposition, juxtaposition of these two, the sheep who follow directions and the girls who don't, and which one is more interesting and which one does this narrator find fascinating, obviously, right? Then he describes the customers in the store as house slaves, which is a metaphor, right? The idea that these women are actually not housewives and not doing what they want, but they're actually slaves to these choices they've made. The idea being, if you are a conformist, you are a slave to the rules of society, and you put yourself in that position by accepting that. So we don't know yet what our narrator is going to do. You know, it's one thing to have a girl in a bathing suit down on the beach where, what with the glare, nobody can look at each other much anyway. And another thing, in the cool of the A&P, under the fluorescent lights, under all those stacked packages with their feet padding along naked over our checkerboard green and cream rubber tile floor. Oh, Daddy, Stokesy said beside me, I feel so faint. Darling, I said, hold me tight. Stokesy's married with 2 babies chucked up in the fuselage already, but as far as I can tell, that's the only difference. He's 22, and I was 19 this April. Okay, so the narrator is staring at these women, but every other man in the store cannot help from staring at them as well. And Stokesy, who is the other clerk, is doing the same thing. The difference is Stokesy's married, and it's sort of showing the progression of where the narrator will be in a few years. Stokesy's 22, he's married, he's got children, he's stuck in this job for life. His only ambition can be to stay in this and become the manager, and that's typical of his blue class upbringing. The narrator doesn't want to become Stokesy, and he makes sure to separate this. Like, I was 19, and this also goes to the point of view. He's a 19-year-old. And then, okay, when we read the next paragraph, is it done, he asks, the responsible married man finding his voice. I forgot to say he thinks he's going to be manager some sunny day. Maybe in 1990 when it's called the Great Alexandrov and Petrushky Tea Company or something. So Stokesy's life goal, his ambition, his career path is to become manager at the A&P. That is where he's going to go. But then there's this weird reference, and I put it in both blues for language and setting, the Great Alexandrov and Petrushky Tea Company or something. So the A&P, I think it stands for the, I can't remember. I should look that up. But it's an all-purpose store. But he's saying that the A&P eventually will stand for Alexandrov and Petrushky. So this is a reference to Russian communist interest. Alexandrov and Petrushky sounds like Russian words. And it's a reminder to us as readers that the Cold War, there really was a fear that the communists would come and take over the companies in America or the government in America or all of America. And that's why there was such fear of communism in the 50s and the 60s. People had bomb shelters. In schools, they did drills against the attack of the bomb. So it's just reminding us again of where we were in history. Then we have a whole bunch of setting, which tells us where the story is taking place. What he meant was, our town is 5 miles from a beach with a big summer colony on the point, but we're right in the middle of town, and women generally put on a shirt or shorts or something before they get out of the car into the street. And anyway, these were women with 6 children and varicose veins mapping their legs, and nobody, including them, could care less. As I say, we're right in the middle of town, and if you stand at our front doors, you can see 2 banks and the Congressional Church and the newspaper store and 3 real estate offices and about 27 old freeloaders tearing up Central Street because the sewer broke again. It's not as if we're on the Cape. We're north of Boston, and there's people in this town who haven't seen the ocean for 20 years. So here it reminds us the setting. It's a small inland town north of Boston. The Cape, obviously Cape Cod, that's where the beaches are in Massachusetts, but that's That is, 30 minutes or so, maybe even more from Boston. So it's weird that these girls are wearing bathing suits. And I know you're like, well, they could have come from a pool, but he describes them as looking like they've been at the beach. So I don't know necessarily that they've been at a pool. They're definitely beach going kind of behavior. The girls had reached the meat counter and were asking McMahon something. He pointed, they pointed, and they shuffled out of sight behind a pyramid of Diet Delight peaches. All that was left for us to see was old McMahon patting his mouth and looking after them, sizing up their joints. Poor kids. I mean, I began to feel sorry for them. They couldn't help it. Now here comes the sad part of the story. At least my family says it's sad, but I don't think so myself. I'm going to stop at this line because this is a really important line, because this represents the shift in the story. This word now indicates that something is about to change. And I put it in blue because it's foreshadowing and it draws the reader in. There's going to be something coming up that's sad. And then he says, my family says it's sad, but I don't. So what are we, the reader, going to think? Are we going to think this is sad or not? Then I also added that this is the conflict because the narrator tells us the action of the story pits him against his family. So that's man versus man or man versus society. So as we read, we're going to keep thinking which one may this be. The store is pretty empty, it being a Thursday afternoon, that's setting. So there was nothing much to do except lean on the cash register and wait for the girls to show up again. The whole store was like a pinball machine, and I don't know which tunnel they'd come out of. After a while, they come around the far aisle, around the light bulbs, records discounted with Caribbean 6 or Tony Martin Sings or some such gunk you wonder what they waste the wax on, 6-packs of candy bars and plastic toys done up in cellophane that fall apart when a kid looks at them anyway. Around they come, Queenie still leading the way, holding a little gray jar in her hand. So this is a simile, a language device describing how the store is set up. Slots 3 through 7 are unmanned, and I could see her wandering between Stokes and me, but Stokesy, with his usual luck, draws an old party in baggy gray pants who stumbles up with 4 giant cans of pineapple juice. What do these bums do with all that pineapple juice? I've often asked myself. So the girls come to me. Queenie puts down the jar, and I take it in my fingers icy cold. Kingfish fancy herring snacks in pure sour cream, 49 cents. Now her hands are empty, not a ring or a bracelet Barris God made of, and I wonder where the money's coming from. Still, with that prim look, she lifts a folded dollar bill out of the hollow at the center of her nubbed pink top. The jar went heavy in my hand. Really, I thought that was so cute. Okay, so Stokesy has bad luck. That's an orange. This is another rhetorical question device asking, drawing the reader in. And then this is definitely like point of view. I'm wondering where that money is going to come from. And then, of course, he thinks it's cute, so that's tone. Then everybody's luck begins to run out. Lingle, a new character, Lingle, comes in from haggling with a truck full of cabbages on the lot and is about to scuttle into that door marked manager, behind which he sits all day, when the girls touch his eye. Lingle's pretty dreary, teaches Sunday school and the rest, but he doesn't miss that much. He comes over and says, girls, this isn't the beach. Queenie blushes, though maybe it's just a brush of sunburn I was noticing for the first time, now that she was so close. My mother asked me to pick up a jar of herring snacks. Her voice kind of startled me. The way voices do when you see the people first coming out, so flat and dumb, yet kind of tony too. The way it ticked over pick up and snacks. All of a sudden, I slid right down her voice into her living room. Her father and other men were standing around in ice cream coats and bow ties, and the women were in sandals, picking up herring snacks on toothpicks off a big plate, and they were all holding drinks the color of water with olives and sprigs of mint in them. When my parents have somebody over, they get lemonade. Or, if it's a really racy affair, Schlitz in tall glasses with, they do it every time, cartoon stenciled on. Okay, so something kind of big happens in this paragraph where her voice is not what he expected. And as soon as he hears her voice, it opens up the reality of what her world is like versus his world. And this is white collar versus blue collar, high class versus lower middle class, this upper class upbringing, this idea of what it might be like. And he sees her father and other men standing around in ice cream coats. Ice cream coats is a reference to those pinstriped jackets and bow ties that men would wear at the old-fashioned ice cream soda shops or a barbershop quartet kind of thing. And it indicates that they're dressed up fancy. And the women are wearing, fancy sandals, and they're picking up toothpicks, and they're holding the drinks the color of water with olives and sprigs of mint in them. This implies a clear drink, a martini, a gimlet, a mint julep, fancy kind of drinks that upper class people would drink, right? Then he compares it to what happens at his house. His house, you get lemonade, and if it's really fancy, Schlitz. So Schlitz is a malt liquor. I can't make my mouse moves. Hold on. I don't know where my mouse is. Schlitz is a malt liquor, which is kind of cheaper version than beer, and it's symbolic of his blue-collar roots. This voice into the living room, I have a long explanation here, which I explain what the difference is between white-collar and blue-collar, so I'm just going to read it to you. The narrator compares his life with Queenie's. She's a white-collar worker. She's white-collar and he is blue-collar. This is an illusion because white-collar indicates highly educated. Jobs with a salary, this is usually a job that requires a college degree, versus blue-collar, which is hourly jobs that are usually skills-based, manual labor. They start at minimum wage. Sometimes they could be much higher than minimum wage. So here are examples of white-collar workers, right? Doctor, lawyer, politician, teacher, reporter. White-collar because they used to wear a suit with a white shirt and a white collar over their tie. And then blue-collar jobs are plumbers, electricians, construction, sanitation workers, food workers. And the blue collar comes from the fact that workers used to wear denim shirts, and they would have a blue collar. So that's where the idea comes from. And it's basically, the educated upper classes versus the other classes. And Sammy is lower middle class. He's probably not college bound. He is probably going to be working in a store like an A&P as a salesman for the rest of his life, and hopefully he can work his way up to be manager. That's his career trajectory. So he's just noticing this huge difference between them, and it profoundly affects him, and he's thinking about it. That's all right, Lingle said, but this isn't the beach. His repeating this struck me as funny, as if it had just occurred to him, and he'd been thinking all these years the A&P was some big dude, and he was the head lifeguard. He didn't like my smiling. As I say, he doesn't miss much. But he concentrates on giving the girls that sad Sunday school superintendent stare. I guess I should have highlighted this as well because it's a great example of alliteration. And he doesn't use a lot of alliteration in here. So it's kind of this sad, pathetic lingo. Queenie's blush is no sunburn now. And the plump one in plaid that I liked better from the back, a really sweet can, pipes up. We weren't doing any shopping. We just came in for one thing. That makes no difference, Lingle tells her. And I could see from the way his eyes went that he hadn't noticed she was wearing a two-piece before. We want you decently dressed when you come in here. We are decent, Queenie said suddenly, her lower lip pushing, getting sore now that she remembers her place, a place from which the crowd that runs the A&P must look pretty crummy. Fancy herring snacks flashed in her very blue eyes. Her place is a reference to her upper-class upbringing, right? She thinks she's better than these people at the A&P, especially the manager. Girls, I don't want to argue with you. After this, come in here with your shoulders covered. It's our policy. He turns back. That's policy for you. Policy is what the kingpins want. What the others want is juvenile delinquency. This is our first hint at maybe what the central idea of the story is, this idea of following policy versus not following it, and who creates the policy and who's it really intended for. All the while, the customers who'd been showing up with their carts, but, sheep, seeing a scene, they'd all bunched up on Stokesy, who shook open a paper bag as gently as peeling a peach, not wanting to miss a word. I could feel in the silence everybody getting nervous, most of all Lingle, who asks me, Sammy, have you rung up this purchase? He's once again referring to the customers as sheep, and like sheep, they all go away from the drama. And then Sammy, and I highlighted this and put, this is the narrator's name, and we're almost done with the story, 2/3 of the way through, before we ever learn the narrator's name. And I think Updike does this on purpose to keep us connected with this character that he's talking to us as if we're living vicariously through him. And now, all of a sudden, we're separated from him and kind of watching what he does. Sammy, have you run up the purchase? I thought and said no, but it wasn't about that I was thinking. I go through the punches, 4, 9, grosch, tote. Oh, it's more complicated than you think, and after you do it often enough, it begins to make a little song, and you hear words to. In my case, hello, big bear, you buck gunk, happy people, splat, the splat being the drawer flying out. I uncreased the bill, tenderly, as you might imagine, it just having come from between the 2 smoothest scoops of vanilla I'd ever known there were, and pass a half and a penny into her narrow pink palm, and nestle the herrings in a bag, and twist its neck, and hand it over, all the time thinking. Okay, so I've highlighted this in red because this leads the reader to question, what is it he's thinking about? And we know what he's thinking about is the central conflict of the story. Like, what should we do about the society trying to force us into these rules? And then there's this whole tone thing where we hear the register as he hears it, and it's not a job. It's kind of like this ridiculous noise that it makes. And then this 2 smoothest scoops of vanilla is a language device, obviously describing the top of her bathing suit from which, or I guess what's under the top of her bathing suit, from which the dollar just came. The girls, and who'd blame them, are in a hurry to get out, so I say I quit to Lingle quick enough for them to hear, hoping they'll stop and watch me, their unsuspected hero. They keep right on going into the electric eye. The door flies open, and they flicker across the lot into their car, Queenie and Plaid and big, tall Goonie. Not that as raw material she was so bad. Leaving me with Lingle and a kink in his eyebrow. The kink in his eyebrow, he has his eyebrow raised. I can't just do one eyebrow. So I say I quit. So this, of course, is the climax of the story. He's quitting for these girls, but it's also finally showing you the conflict, which is, man versus society, I think mostly. There is also this inner idea of Sammy versus himself. What's he going to do? Because this, of course, is a coming-of-age story, and this is the moment at which he loses his innocence, and he realizes that things are not, the world is not as he had seen it before. And once you lose your innocence, of course, you can't get it back. And so here he is, I quit. And this is also a heated moment for him. He quits kind of suddenly without really thinking it through. So Lingle is going to give him the opportunity to back up. So this is what he had been thinking about instead of whether or not he'd broke up the purchase. So Lingle has this kink in his eyebrow. Did you say something, Sammy? I said I quit. I thought you did. You didn't have to embarrass them. It was they who were embarrassing us. I started to say something that came out fiddly-doo. It's a saying of my grandmother's, and I know she would have been pleased. I don't think you know what you're saying, Lingle said. I know you don't, I said, but I do. I pulled the bow at the back of my apron and started shrugging it off my shoulders. A couple of customers that had been heading for my slot began to knock against each other like scared pigs in a chute. I probably should highlight this too. This is a really important element of language here, and I'm going to highlight for you what it is. This is a tense shift. From past to present, and it's basically putting us in the moment with him right there now. This is what he's doing. These are highlighted in red because they go to that central idea that what is the purpose behind Sammy quitting this, and does he know what he's doing or not? This language device here is once again reminding us of the customers, but it's a new metaphor. It's an allusion. Pigs in a chute. This is a reference to pigs on their way to be slaughtered, following the leader, even though they're afraid. It's an extension of this sheep symbol metaphor because it shows the dangers of simply following along without thinking. It could lead to your death. It's not good. Lingle sighs and begins to look very patient and old and gray. He's been a friend of my parents for years. Sammy, you don't want to do this to your mom and dad, he tells me. It's true. I don't. But it seems to me that once you begin a gesture, it's fatal not to go through with it. I folded the apron, Sammy stitched in red on the pocket, and I put it on the counter and dropped the bow tie on top of it. The bow tie's theirs, if you ever wondered. You'll feel this for the rest of your life, Lingle says, and I know that it's true, too. But remembering how he made that pretty girl blush makes me so scrunchy inside. I punch the no sale tab, and the machine whirls, people, and the drawer splats out. One advantage to this scene taking place in summer. I can follow this up with a clean exit. There's no fumbling around getting your coat and galoshes. I just saunter into the electric eye in my white shirt that my mother ironed the night before, and the door heaves itself open, and outside, the sunshine is skating around on the asphalt. So we have some more central idea. The gesture itself is really important, and once you start something, you need to follow it through, even though there will be consequences, and consequences of your actions will affect you for the rest of your life. Then I like this, if you've ever wondered, kind of reminding us that it's his first-person narrator, and he's still talking to us. And he describes the people again. This could be tone if you like. If you want to add that, that could be another tone. Oh, that could be another tone. And then he talks about this white shirt that his mother ironed. So I put this as conflict and character. It talks to us about how he still relies on his parents. He lives with his parents, and this is going to be devastating to his parents. And so it reminds us of the conflict that this was him and his family thinks it's sad, but he thinks it's not. And you can read this comment yourself if you want. And then the sunshine is skating around on the asphalt is a metaphor implying that the sunshine can, it's personification, right? Sunshine can skate. I look around for my girls, this ownership of his girls, right? Like I've saved them, and it's this my girls. You could use that for conflict. You could use it for tone. You could use it for a central idea. You can use it for a language idea. It's kind of encapsulates the whole story that he's doing something for these girls. But they're gone, of course. There wasn't anybody but some young married screaming with their children about some candy they didn't get by the door of a powder blue Falcon station wagon. Looking back at the big windows over the bag of peat moss and aluminum lawn furniture stacked on the pavement, I could see Lingle in my place in the slot, checking the sheep through. His face was dark gray and his back stiff, as if he just had an injection of iron, and my stomach kind of fell as I felt how hard the world was going to be to me hereafter. This is another, I didn't put these as language devices every time it says slot, but the slots, the idea of the slots are kind of like the chutes that the pig go in, or extending the idea of the pinball machine. But the big thing here, of course, is going to be this last sentence, and this is probably the best central idea sentence because it really shows that he didn't think through what his actions were going to be, and he knows it's going to affect him for the rest of his life, and he's never going to be able to come back to this place. He has lost his innocence. It's a coming-of-age story, and when you lose your innocence, when you go past the point where you know something, you can never unknow that once you've learned something, right? So he can never unknow that the world has been unfair all this time, and that people are following along instead of thinking for themselves, and he wants to think for himself, but that's going to make his life so much harder, and he can't do anything to change that now. So that's the story. I hope you liked my interpretation, and I hope you are able to use this when you are writing essays for yourself to come back and see what I've pulled out of this. I'm going to show you my sample essays when the time comes. Bye.